I have a 1,500-gallon septic system. The white riser in the foreground is the first tank, and the second riser is the filter, which I reminded every time I get my system pumped out that I need to clean that every year or so, which I always forget about. So I put it in my phone to remind me every Halloween, so I won't forget. It is now code in Minnesota that you need a 2-foot riser like the one for the pump in the first tank now to make it easier to pump out. But I'm not going to do that because it's too expensive and I only use it half the year and I'm all alone here. Every year my septic system freezes up, probably because it goes under the road. This year I didn't have to shut it off till January 1st because it was such a warm winter. But in the spring, I don't know, due to condensation or something, I don't know, there's always more water in it. When I turn the power on, the pump automatically comes on. If it doesn't shut off right away, then I know it still froze. Well, the alarm went off and the pump didn't come on, and then I knew my pump was shot. I had to have somebody come out and pump it out. It cost me $500 because their closest guy was 50 miles away, and he had to charge extra for driving that far. If it hadn't been 8 years since I had it pumped out, I would have just bought a pump and pumped out the water myself, but well, maybe it would have been a good idea to try that anyway. It might have been cheaper for me in the long run. There's about a half dozen screws that hold the cover on where the pump is. Here's a picture looking down the riser before it was pumped out. The 3 wires going into the side go underground. I know it only looks like there's 2, but there's 3. One of them doesn't do anything. It wasn't hooked up to anything. That would be the float down there that you see. The pump I have is a piggyback model, so it's got a float switch inside the pump, I believe. And then there's the 120 volt power cord, and they piggyback onto each other up in the riser there, that rectangular tube sticking out of the ground. That hooks into a 120 volt outlet there. Notice the rubber grommet where the wires go into the side of the riser and go through the dirt. That grommet was hard to get out. I tried it with a screwdriver, and then I had to use a pry bar for roofing, and that popped it out pretty good. You can see the pry bar here, and I took the cap off the rectangular tube, and that exposed all the wires, and I disconnected the wires coming from the pump and started pulling them through. You can see the hole I dug in order to get down and pull the wires out. Of course, 2 of them had plugs on the end. The one that wasn't connected to anything came out pretty easy, but other than that, I had to dig it out. I got a piece of lumber out of the shed and screwed a hook in the end of it. And that's to pull the pump out from the bottom. I used the other end to tap the union junction apart, which was pretty loose to begin with. And you can see it's disconnected here. The pump has been pumped out here. It's kind of hard to tell, but there's just a very small amount of water in the bottom. If you notice a little rectangle thing down at the bottom, that's like a patio block or something that the pump was sitting on. Notice the ring on the top of the pump later on. That's what I hooked on to pull the pump out. They all seem to have this, which is convenient because I don't want to crawl down there and get it. Also noticed the yellow rope. I tied it onto one of the wires and pulled the rope through. That way I can pull the wires back in through there again when I hook it back up. I used that piece of lumber with the hook in the end to pull it up and out, but I also had to get a garden rake because I wanted to tip and get caught underneath as I was pulling it out. So I just did that. Here's the pump after I carried it over near the outside spigot. I carried it while it was still on the hook, so I still hadn't touched it. And I pressure washed it, get all the poop off it. After it's clean and dried, I suggest you set it next to a wall and take a scale on the top of it and scribe a line on the wall to get the height exactly right. Here's a few pictures of the old pump, so I know what to look for. And I took some pictures of the specs on it so I could match it up. I was told not to buy anything from the box store or hardware store, and I got a few names of pumps that you should buy. One of them was Liberty, which I was able to order through Home Depot, and they sent it FedEx right to my house. So that worked out pretty well. Here's a picture of the new pump, so I know what to buy next time it fails, which shouldn't be for, well, if it lasts as long as the last one did, be 20 years. But of course I could do something stupid like leave the power on to it while the septic is froze and leave it running continuously, which may have been what happened to the last one. I don't know. Could be. The new pump did not stand as high as the old pump did, which means I had to cut the pipe and splice it in to make it a little taller. And what I did was, I did that just fine, checked the height, put it in, and checked to see that the union nut screwed on. Then I pulled it out and glued it together. The bad thing is I did not check to see that the elbow was facing in the right direction. And of course I got it 180 degrees off, exactly. I couldn't have done better if I tried. I've heard it said that there's a 50-50 chance of something bad happening, then there's a 90% chance that it will. I always thought that was kind of funny. Anyway, I had to cut it again, and this time I spliced it without gluing it together. So I had some adjustment, and I got the orientation right. When I had it 180 degrees off, of course, the pump was hitting the wall. And when I tried to turn it a half turn of thread to get it right, it was too tall and the union nut wouldn't go on. So don't make that mistake. Of course, it's not a big deal if it leaks a little because it's just going to leak back down into the septic system. As a matter of fact, in warmer climates, they require a check valve in there. And if you have a check valve, then you have to put a weep hole in. Otherwise, you can get a airlock and it won't pump. So I tested out the pump by plugging it in and tripping the float switch on the pump. And made sure it ran. I reassembled everything, put it all back together, except I ran the wire to the alarm float switch, which wasn't connected to anything, I thought. And I ran it through the hole in the side of the riser to make it a separate alarm. and I ordered parts to do that. I had to clip off these little slider connectors on the ends of them in order to get it through this port. And then I waited, and a couple days later I got to thinking, how could these three-pronged piggyback plugs possibly set off the alarm? It just didn't make sense to me. So I took it apart again, and lo and behold, I found out that when I lifted the cover off, these slider connectors came apart, and the wires just fell down to the bottom. And when I looked down in there, when I lifted that cover off, it just looked like it was never connected to anything. There are 2 outlets in the tower, one for the piggyback plugs for the pump and one for the 9-volt transformer that I think goes through the alarm float switch. There's also a 9-volt battery you can see here, and that's been in there for 20 years. When I tried to pull it out, it actually pulled the terminal off the battery on one of the terminals and yanked the wire out of the plastic thing here. So I'm going to have to replace that. I got one of those coming with part of the stuff that I bought. It isn't hard to guess that the battery is to run the alarm in case the power is shut off from the circuit breaker box. The alarm system consists of a light on top of the tower, a buzzer, the round part you see here, and there's a toggle switch, 3 positions, test, silent, and normal mode. Well, it's been a couple weeks and I received my 9-volt batteries for my backup. When the power's not on, I still get the alarm. It only sounds off on the audio, no light alarm. But everything is done. I just need to screw down the cover. Everything tested out okay using my hook on a stick to trip the float alarms. That's it.